If the reading that Barbara just read for us doesn't irritate you just a tiny bit, then you probably weren't listening very carefully, because it's a seriously irritating, upsetting story that Jesus tells that kind of gets under your skin, and if you let it work away at you too much, you could find yourself feeling quite uncomfortable. So it's the story of a landowner, and the landowner needs laborers to go out into the vineyard to harvest the crop. So the Vantrites are looking for laborers. They go down to the labor exchange. They want people to come and pick daffodils. The landowner's manager, goes out first thing in the morning, bright and early at the crack of dawn, and hires a group of laborers. And they go off into the fields and start the back-breaking toil of bending. I don't know, do they pick daffodils by hand now? Is there a machine that picks daffodils, or do you know? Huh? A little knife, okay. I mean, just imagine. That's hard work. So they're going down these long rows of daffodils. The heat starts on, and they're working really hard from the crack of dawn. Later, about 9 o'clock, so these guys have been working for a while now. Later, about 9 o'clock, it's clear the work's not all going to get done. So the landowner sends the manager, Mr. Vantrite, sends the manager into the labor exchange again, and more laborers are hired and sent into the fields. Then again at noon, like it's lunchtime, it's time for lunch break, he goes again and hires more daffodil pickers. Then about 3 o'clock, mid-afternoon, more are hired, and finally a last bunch is hired at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and sent to work, I don't know, for a couple of hours in the field. So you've got some who've been working probably for 10 hours, the first group, some who've been working for 8, some 6, down to the ones who've worked for a couple hours through the day. At the end of the day, the payment is by day. So at the end of the day, you've agreed to work for $100 a day. So those who are hired last, those who have worked for 2 hours, are brought forward in front of everybody else, and those who worked for 2 hours are paid $100. At which point, those who've been working since 6 o'clock in the morning are rubbing their hands enthusiastically, convinced that obviously, when their time comes to get paid, they're going to recoup at least $200, because after all, it's only fair that they who have worked through the entire day should get paid more than those who've worked for a couple of hours. So imagine how you feel when it comes your turn, and you've been in the first group, it comes your turn to be paid. And imagine that you are handed a $100 bill, just like those who have worked for 2 hours. How are you feeling? I imagine you're feeling irritated, angry, probably cheated, and you're certainly feeling that this arrangement has been profoundly unfair. It's just not right that those who work 2 hours should be paid the same as those who have worked 10 hours. You've all done the same work. You've all labored the same, and you deserve more because you've worked harder and longer. And the interesting thing in the story is that Jesus doesn't try to fix this. Jesus doesn't say, oh, it's okay, you'll get your reward in heaven. Jesus doesn't say, well, you'll get hired last tomorrow and those other ones will be hired first and so they'll have to work longer tomorrow. Jesus doesn't try to make it even. He gives no indication whatsoever that in his mind it ought to be fair. In fact, Jesus seems in this story to be totally willing to entertain the possibility without complaint that life indeed is just unequal. And you know that's true. You know that gifts, that privileges, that honors, that talents are unequally distributed. I am 5'6". How tall are you, Scott? That's not fair. Scott is 6'2". When I was 13, I wanted to be 6'2". How did that work out for you, Stacy? You got a little bit there. The reality is, everything from our physical being on through our inner life, our material blessings, our family gifts, how life works out and turns out for us is unjustly distributed. Jesus gives no explanation for this reality. He doesn't try to justify it. He doesn't try to make sense of it. He doesn't try to explain it. He simply lets it sit there. And the laborers have to adjust. But you know the story. They don't adjust at all. They become angry, bitter, and resentful. See, it's not the unfairness that's the problem. It's how we respond, what story we make up for ourselves around that unfairness, what story we create about the fact that the circumstances of our lives haven't turned out precisely the way we thought they should. And the story these guys tell them is that it should be different. We should be able to make it fair. We should be able to make it work. And so, Jesus says, they grumbled against the landowner. They whined and they complained and they were petulant and upset. They had a story that said it should be fair. And when it's not fair, something is desperately wrong. But for Jesus, nothing was wrong with the circumstance. What was wrong was the attitude towards life. Because when we look at life from a fair, unfair perspective, we can all find something that is unfair. Doesn't matter how tall we are, how privileged we are, how materially blessed we are. We can all find some circumstance in life that isn't the way we think it ought to be. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not get her will. Maybe. We'll see. She was determined she would not die before the next President of the United States of America got to appoint the next Supreme Court Justice in the U.S. The jury's still out whether or not she's going to get that wish, but it's looking a little bit suspicious that she may not. So even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America can't make everything fair, can't make the circumstances of life run precisely and exactly as she might want them to unfold. So what's the story? What's the story we're going to tell ourselves about that? The temptation is to say, life's not fair. I didn't get enough. Enough what? I don't know. You name it. Enough inches in my height? enough ability to run, enough talent to play sports, enough family, enough children, enough marriage, enough something. I didn't get enough. And when we start down the road of not enough, we are starting down the road that suggests there is something more that we need to add to our lives that will get us that feeling of content and peace in our hearts. Those who were hired first at the beginning of the day, Jesus says when the first came, those who'd worked all day, they thought that they would receive more. I deserve more of whatever it is that I think I want and I need in this life. When we look at life from that perspective, there is never enough. There's never enough to go around. There's never enough of whatever it is we think we need more of to satisfy that inner place in our being that is discontent with the unfairness of reality as it is. Jesus used the same word. The word he uses in verse 10 here, when the first came, they thought they would receive more. The word is pleion, a plenitude. He uses the same word earlier in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 6, where he says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear." And then here comes the word. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? There is a quality, there is a reality at the heart of life that is more than anything we think we lack. And it resides within our inner being. So this is all about the perspective we take on life. Life isn't about getting enough. It's about receiving what is, embracing what is, and welcoming the reality of what is. The landowner asks those who were hired first, in the English translation, "Are you envious because I am generous?" It's a great question. It's not actually the question he asks, but it's a lovely interpretation of the question he asks, because the question he actually asks is very odd and hard to understand. The question he actually asks in Greek is your eye evil because I am good? Evil, disjointed, disconnected. When we're looking at life in terms of more and less, our perspective, our way of seeing is out of alignment with reality. We start to feel cheated. We start to feel like life is stacked up against us. I told you last week that I was talking to a counselor and they said that the thing they're seeing in their counseling practice right now more than anything else is anger. I said, anger at what? And they said, anger at COVID. Think about that. Simon Tuffin emailed me later that day and said, you know, if you scratch that anger, underneath is fear. I think he's right. Fear that I'm not going to get enough. Fear that I'm going to run out of whatever I need. Fear that life is scarce. But Jesus concludes this question, is your eye evil because I am good? No matter what is going on the surface of your life, no matter how hard the struggle is, no matter how much you sense a lack, the reality that Jesus wants us to see is that life is fundamentally, foundationally good. And however much we feel a lack, however much we feel cheated, We can always, always find something beautiful if we look carefully. We can always find a good and a generous act if we look carefully. And those things, if we look carefully, if our eye is not disjointed, if our eye is not evil, those things will feed that true moreness that is inside of us. Those things will satisfy the deepest longings of our heart. There is goodness. There is truth and beauty in life. And if we have eyes to see, we will find that goodness, no matter what else may be going on in our lives.